Hello and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video I thought I would do something a little bit different than what I've done before on my channel. So I'd like to start talking about some subjects that are very important to me and that I feel are kind of under discussed in the art community sometimes. I feel like a lot of the focus tends to be on the technical aspects of art and the career aspects of art, and not so much about kind of artist mindsets and how we can all just kind of feel better about ourselves while we're in this super competitive and tough environment. I basically just want to start the conversation on these topics, and I don't claim to have all the answers or anything. I just want to share kind of my experience and how I've dealt with some of these things, and then maybe they can help you, maybe you can share how you've approached these things and help other people in the comments, etc. I just want this to be more of a kind of casual thing, and I want to really preface that's what this is. It's not kind of universal scripted advice that's very thought through, because in some of my other videos, people have really misconstrued what I said, and gotten really angry that what I said didn't line up with their own worldview. And I think it's just a case of thinking one advice fits all, which really isn't true. We all have different life circumstances and just different personal philosophies, so of course not everything is going to resonate with everyone, and that's fine. I just hope if that's the case with you, with this video or with any of my other videos, that you won't kind of take that in bad faith, and that you'll instead just realize I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just kind of sharing my thoughts. And so I wanted to kind of make that disclaimer, because honestly a part of the reason why I don't make a lot of videos, especially talking videos, is because it's very stressful for me to kind of just try to be helpful and then have people be very, very angry at me in the comments because they didn't like one sentence I said, or they didn't like how I worded myself. It just makes me very stressed because I don't want people to misunderstand me, and I don't want to cause harm. But my hope is that if I kind of take this more casual approach where I just act as a conversation starter instead of this all-knowing person you can look up to, I think that will be a lot better, and I hope you will all get something out of it as well. If anything, it will just get you thinking about some stuff that you hadn't considered before. So that long disclaimer out of the way, today we're going to talk about failure and how we can reframe it. So we all fail a lot throughout our lives. That's the one constant of anyone's life, is that you're gonna fail and mess up, especially in something like art, where the skill ceiling is so high that even if you're 50 years into it, you'll still kind of fail sometimes. Fail at meeting your own expectations, or fail at meeting your clients' expectations, and then of course you'll fail outside of art, just in life in general. Sometimes in a huge way, sometimes it will be small and inconsequential, but we all fail. We all mess up, and that can feel really draining after a while, especially again in art. And that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I see so many of my fellow artists get really down on themselves and fall into this almost this spiral of self-loathing. It gets to a point where the perfectionism, or even if they're not perfectionists, but just their standards for themselves are kind of so unhealthy that they kind of just get super defeated and they lose all motivation. Maybe they even stop drawing. And that's obviously a really big shame, because while failure is something that we all have to go through, we can all also choose how we deal with it, or rather we can choose how we look at it. So the reason I picked this for this video is because I'm drawing Hades fan art. I think this game is a really wonderful example of how failure can be a good thing. So Basically, if you're not familiar, in Hades, the main objective of the game is to fight your way out of hell. And every time you fail, you die, you get sent back to the start. And then you essentially have to just keep trying again until you beat all the enemies, beat the final boss, and get out. So that might sound like a horrible loop where you just keep dying, and that sounds really punishing, right? But the great thing is that every time you die, you unlock more of the story. Every time you die, you get to talk to the characters again. They have new dialogue. You unlock skills. Like, every time you fail, you learn a lot more about the game, the world, the characters, the story. And of course, you also learn how to defeat certain enemies, right? Because they kill you, and then you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this thing because that got me killed. Okay, next time I won't do it. And it sounds so simple, right? You progress by dying, you progress by failing. And I really think that same thing applies to life if we can look at it that way. So basically, if we take each failure as an opportunity to learn and not as this kind of all-consuming defeat, we can basically fail upward. We can just keep failing our way to the top. Like, with each failure, we can pick up some new knowledge, and we can get rid of some of our own bad habits, and we can just keep getting better with each failure. And like, we're gonna keep failing no matter what, but we can at least have a better attitude about it. Kind of like, of course, it's not fun to fail, and no one enjoys failing, but kind of shifting the way you look at it from like, oh, this is horrible and I'm a huge failure, and everything I do is wrong, shifting that into, okay, I messed up this one time, but like, here's what I learned, here's what I'll do differently next time. So maybe it sounds overly simplistic to just kind of flip a switch in your brain and suddenly you don't feel bad about failing anymore. It's not about that. So let me give you an example. So first of all, I want to preface this by saying I fail a lot too. I think it's easy to look at people who are in a kind of place of success, people who have reached the place where you want to go. I think it's easy to look at them and think they must have it easy and they must just kind of like know what they're doing, and never fail in the same way I do. And I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes I look at the artists I look up to and I just think, wow, they must just kind of do this with no effort. Like they must just get it right every time because they're so good. Like, how could they not? But then I have to like kind of take a step back and be like, okay, hold on. They definitely work very hard to be where they are, and they definitely don't just get everything right every time, because that's impossible. But the point is, I fail a lot too, and a couple of weeks ago I really failed pretty hard and I got really down on myself. If you're not familiar with me, I work full-time at a game studio, and I'm the senior illustrator and concept artist there. So basically my day job is pretty much just making concept art of characters and creating characters. And a few weeks ago I was working on a new character, and I can't really get into any details because this is obviously all under NDA, but basically it was a character type that was very, very out of my comfort zone. And then in addition to that, there were elements of this character that was something I had literally never drawn before in my life. Like, literally, I'd never drawn something like this. So now suddenly I have this character that's very out of my comfort zone. I've never really done it before, and now I have to do it, and I have to do it to a very high standard, and I have to do it on a time schedule. And so going into it, I was pretty nervous already, but I kind of felt like I had it in the bag. Like, I had this weird arrogance about it, like, oh, I'm just gonna do this and this and this, and then everything's gonna be great. And so I started making some thumbnails and handing them in for feedback. And I was feeling I didn't feel like it was my best work, but I felt like it was cool and like I had hit the mark. But then all the feedback I got was basically just like, this is completely wrong for this character. Like, this just does not work. And obviously that's kind of an exaggeration. My coworkers don't talk to me like that. But it was basically just kind of, it felt like just an avalanche of negative comments. And I really felt like I had failed because I had failed to meet the criteria for this character. But so I was kind of like, okay, well, I'll just keep trying. Like at that point I was almost getting a bit defensive. Like, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna do a few more. And then I kept doing this for a week. For 5 days, I was working on these thumbnails. Again, I kept making like incremental improvements because as I was doing more, they kept getting like a tiny bit better. But my mindset was the same. And at the end of the week, I had just like kept getting even more negative feedback. And every time it kind of felt worse because I felt like, but I made some improvements this time, but I still didn't improve the important parts. Like I just kind of put my head in the sand about those parts, and I just didn't really address the feedback in a real way. So on Friday afternoon, I was kind of like just feeling done with the whole thing. I was really feeling defeated. I was feeling my imposter syndrome so hard, like all the like confidence and arrogance I had at the beginning was gone, and I was kind of just ready to just lie down on the floor and never think about this character again. Like, I really felt horrible because usually, I mean, concept art is always hard, but usually it's not that hard. It's not like a full week where you don't hear a single positive thing. But that's when I kind of was forced to take a step back. Like, I was feeling so bad about it, and then I was kind of like, hold on, what's actually going on here? Because I was having all these thoughts of like, oh, this is someone else's fault because they didn't provide me with enough reference or whatever. Like, I was starting to like blame other people. I was still feeling defensive, and I was also just feeling like it was all my fault. Like, I was feeling all these like very negative emotions that are very unproductive, especially in a professional setting. So took a step back. I was like, hold on, what's actually happening here? And I realized, I read over all the feedback again, and I realized what was wrong was that I wasn't really willing to embrace what this character was. I was kind of like trying to make it my own thing, instead of putting that aside and focusing on what was actually needed for this character. So I realized that. Then I also went back and I did a bunch of research on this character type, and then I went back to the drawing board, made some more thumbnails. They were very different from what I started with, and suddenly the feedback was more positive. Suddenly it wasn't about, oh, this and this and this is wrong. It was more, I like this, but this part is blah, blah, blah. You know, it was more like normal feedback, right? And so I had figured it out. I had turned my horrible failure into actually good concepts. And the thing is, I wouldn't have gotten to those good concepts without failing so hard at them in the beginning, right? The only reason I got to those good concepts is I totally failed, and then the important part is I didn't kind of just dig my heels in and say this is everyone else's fault, I'm just going to keep going. I took in their feedback, I lowered my defenses, and I did research to cover up my blind spots, to address all the things that had been said, and I came out of it suddenly making this huge jump in this particular area of design. And that is what I mean by reframing failure. It's like you can let it beat you down, or you can kind of turn it around and really look at what you can learn from this experience, and you can use that failure to fail upward. Like, I totally failed in that first week. Like, it was bad. Like, I can't show you, but it was bad, believe me. And upon examining, like, my mindset when I was doing those, I realized I was being arrogant. I wasn't listening. I wasn't doing my due diligence. I was kind of just jumping into it. But then by going through all that, I was able to turn the concept phase around, and I was also able to like learn not to ever do that again for any other designs I do. And so failing that hard made me a stronger concept artist in the end. That's really something you can do with everything in your life and everything in art. And it's not about doing that because success is everything, because productivity is everything, improvement is everything. It's not about that at all. It's not about feeding into the hustle culture. It's about treating yourself with kindness and looking at things you experience with a bit of compassion instead of thinking you're just a horrible piece of crap that can't do anything right. You look at it a bit more analytically almost, and give yourself a bit of a break, but also take responsibility for what you're doing. And it really just makes you feel so much better about everything. It's like, for me personally, it feels like you're accepting your shortcomings, but then you're also not allowing them to hold you back. It's almost like taking the bad parts of yourself and like using them as a slingshot to get yourself to a better place. And sometimes it can be hard to look at our failures in this way. Sometimes it feels easier to kind of just blame others and stick your head in the sand and kind of move on. Especially when it comes to like not art, but more like personal things that happened. It can really take a lot out of you to kind of examine things in that way. But for me, both in art and in life in general, looking at things this way has just made everything so much easier to deal with. It makes it easier for me to kind of focus on the entire process, the entire like art journey that I always talk about. Like, art is a journey. It's not just about the one drawing, right? It's easier to kind of look ahead when you kind of let go a little bit of this notion that failure is just horrible and bad, and it just makes you an awful artist, an awful person. You really don't have to feel that way, because we're all gonna keep failing. Like, I'm sure I'll keep failing. I'll probably fail at something next week. I have failed so much to get here, and it's just like a constant of all of our lives. Especially like if you're interested in improvement in art, especially, you're gonna have to keep putting yourself out there, going outside your comfort zone, and that inevitably means that you're also gonna fail because you're pushing yourself. But you can keep getting back up and almost like feel good about falling down and you'll be so much happier long term. Like, I know so many people who, like, bless their hearts, but they get so down on themselves for the smallest kind of failings in art, or what they perceive to be failings. Like, whenever we don't meet our own expectations, like, that can essentially feel like a failure. Even though it's kind of like a small thing, it can really drive you down, and it just makes me sad that a lot of people see failure as this like all-encompassing horrible thing and not as more of an opportunity, because to me that's what it is. Most of the time it is an opportunity to learn something. And I also think that without failing we would never really learn much. Like, I don't want to romanticize or idealize failing too much, but when I like think back to the times in my life where I've kind of developed the most, or the times I've kind of learned very important things that helped me a lot after I learned it, that's usually because of failures, like small failures or big failures. Like, it's all kind of compounded into a lot of knowledge. So one analogy I kind of thought of, and I don't know if this is stupid or not, is basically we all start out as an artist with a wall that's just like covered in cracks, and we don't know the cracks are there, but they're there, and whenever we fail, it kind of forces us to look at one of the cracks, right? And when you do fail, you can look at the crack and say, oh no, I'm just flawed and horrible, and I'll never be better. And you can just leave the crack there and just hope it goes away. Or you can actually be like, oh, there's a crack there. You should probably fix that. And then you can like fill in the crack, and then you have one less crack. Oh, I hate this analogy now that I said it out loud. But basically you can like kind of patchwork everything together, so like at the end you'll have less weak points, and you will only expose these weak points by actually exposing them by failing. There's this saying that you have to draw 1,000 bad drawings before you start drawing good drawings. And while it can sound a little bit like sensationalist, I think it's really true. Like, you have to kind of get the bad drawings out of your system, not because it's some like magical thing where like if you get to number 1,000 you're automatically good, but because you really have to figure out what doesn't work to figure out what works. It's very easy to kind of just look at success and look at all the things people did right, but we never really see what went wrong, and we never see how that impacted them. It's called like survivorship bias, I think, where you kind of just look at everything that goes right and you never look at what goes wrong and what you can learn from that. And yeah, it's like, even with this painting, for example, I kind of feel like I failed because I had this like expectation of what I wanted this painting to be, or not expectations, I guess plan is a better word. I had a vision for how the gesture would be and the movement and the lighting and the colors and everything, and in the end it doesn't look like what I wanted it to look like, right? And I think this is probably something you're all familiar with, like your painting not turning out the way you wanted it to, and to me that feels like a failure. It feels like I failed, but it doesn't feel like I'm a failure. It feels like, oh, on this particular painting something went wrong, and then I ask myself, what went wrong? So I realized I was looking through the process, and I realized I had this really cool lighting in the beginning. Like, I really enjoyed the way the shadows were and everything, and then that kind of like disappeared a bit, like as the hours went on, and I was like, that's weird, that kind of just like stopped being a thing. And I realized what had happened was that I started this painting on my iPad, and on my iPad I had this reference image of some really cool lighting, and then I transferred it over to my computer, and I didn't transfer the reference. So now I was working with different reference, and I didn't have like my key reference for the lighting anymore. So then, of course, the lighting started getting worse because I didn't have this cool point of reference that I had earlier. And so the painting turned out a bit worse. And, you know, that's kind of a bummer, right? Like, oh wow, I should have really like brought that reference with me if it was so important. But at the time I just didn't realize it. So that's fine. Like, the painting didn't turn out super well, but I'm still super proud of it because I really pushed myself. I pushed myself to try a few new things. I pushed myself to complete it in a small time frame. But it doesn't, doesn't look exactly the way I want. So now I know for next time, I shouldn't ever just like forget my most important reference. I should always keep using a reference. And after this painting, I've actually started using a lot more reference again, because I'd kind of like been bad at that. And I feel like my art already is getting better again because I just kind of completely forgotten that reference can help so much. And by failing in this small way, I realized that again. So that's how I look at it anyway. And it can be hard to kind of really get to that place. Like I said with my work example, like I also feel really down on myself sometimes. Like, it happens a lot, to be honest, but then you kind of have to shift it and take that step back and look at it differently. And it can be really hard sometimes to take that step back, but it is possible. And it helps if you have a nice community around you, friends who can kind of talk you down to earth. But the real thing is it has to come from inside of you. Like, you have to just have this kind of compassion and understanding for yourself, and you have to really just accept that you are going to fail. But you also have to accept that failure in one thing doesn't make you a failure as a person. It just means, you didn't quite hit the mark that one time. And then it's up to you to do the work, do the effort to make sure that you don't fail in that same way again. And just like slowly all the failures will compound, and then before you know it, you will be in a much better place. So I've talked a lot. I don't really know if I made my point. Like, it's very hard for me to talk. Like, when I don't have a script, I just kind of feel like I'm rambling. So this will be interesting to edit. Hopefully you got something out of it, at least. And even if you don't agree with this mindset, I hope you at least got something out of it. And I hope if you do disagree, you state that in a compassionate way in the comments. Because we can disagree without me being the Antichrist. So that's it. That's the video. If you are interested in the real-time painting process and the step-by-step for this painting, as well as the full rest file, I will have my Gumroad linked below if you're interested in future Patreon rewards. That will also be linked. One of the rewards for my Patreon is access to my Discord server. I feel like I said this a lot, but it's really like a genuinely positive community. I'm very proud of it. So if you are struggling with feeling like a failure and you need some positivity around you, maybe consider joining. Everyone is really super nice and supportive. It's amazing. So that's it. I will see you guys in the next one.